Okay, Dr. Nicole Le Pera, thank you so much for coming onto the podcast today. I'm so excited to interview you.
I am so honored and grateful to be here. Thank you for having me, Floss.
Okay, so I'm going to go through my quick fire questions. I'm going to tell you to say the first thing that comes to your mind. I'm going to try my best not to unpack everything you're saying. I'm sure as a therapist, that's also one of your biggest hobbies when people talk.
I will try to say the first thing that comes to my mind then.
Okay, gorgeous.
Because there's many things often that come to my mind.
Okay. First question. What is one thing that sets your soul on fire?
Oh, the work I do every day. I love what I do.
I mean, and you do it so well. Okay, the next question. What is the last photo you took?
Oh my gosh. Probably of a cat.
Okay.
I have many cats. I love cats. I think actually it was me being a kitten mom with 4 kittens. We have 4 new kittens that are actually just turning 3 months old this weekend. And they were all laying around me as if I literally was their mom, and my heart exploded.
I was going to ask you, are they your own cats that you were taking pictures of? You have 4 kittens.
We are caring for kittens for the time being, yes. So
amazing.
we will see where the journey takes us and those kittens.
Okay, the next question. What's something that people frequently misunderstand or get wrong about you when they don't know who you are?
I think oftentimes my message is understood. I see a lot of times misinterpretations around the concept of self-healing, the empowering, what I hope is an empowering message that I, again, am very passionate to speak on. And I do see many instances of misinterpretations at times.
Okay, so would you say that people are almost willingly misunderstanding what you're saying, or?
I don't think so. Now we can dive into the psychology of it.
Yeah.
Depends on how you define willing, Floss. I think a lot of when we feel very reactive and, defensive and, even it might appear on some level to seek to misunderstand someone. In my opinion, most of our functioning is outside of our awareness. So the short answer is I don't think it's a conscious, necessarily intentional. I think so much of it is wrapped into our deep-rooted beliefs that a lot of the ideas, I'm very well aware that I speak on day in and day out, can be really challenging, and have lived very much a version of that experience when I met many of these concepts myself. So short answer is I don't think it's intentional at all. I think that we do very limited things intentionally. And I think that's a lot of the work that I do, is to really inspire people to become more conscious, so that if that is the case and you don't necessarily want to be misunderstanding, or just maybe even explore what it might be that's coming up for you to cause that reactivity, giving us the opportunity to do so.
Wow, I feel like it would be so hard to get into an actual argument with you because you're just so much compassion about what the person's going through.
Well, funny you say that, because part of the work that I'm doing is to learn how to be compassionate, but also to be first and foremost compassionate to me.
I love that you put so much responsibility in boundaries to the self instead of trying to control the behavior of everyone else around you. I think it's such a wonderful way to talk about boundaries. Okay, so the last quickfire question is...
Oh, shoot, we were still quickfire.
Yeah,
we got off the...
Yes, we've got one
we're focused
more,
again.
And
we
then
got
we can
this.
get right into it. Okay, finish the sentence. I'm still a work in progress when it comes to...
Life. Being that compassionate, loving, open, connected, fulfilled human. And every aspect of living, as far as I see it, we are all works in progress, because I've yet to find that proverbial end that we're all searching for. And I think that that's the journey of life, is learning how to live in that journey. So everything.
When you say talking about the proverbial end, would you say talking about your healing journey? Like there's no end to it. It's
done. Anything we want to be done with stress, done with our endless to-do list, done with healing, right? At this place of where we imagine we can, I guess, on some level just be. And while I definitely agree that that's the end goal, I don't think we gain the ability to be when we've checked external boxes. And that's usually what we're referencing when we're looking for done. I actually think done is an internal state where we can learn how to be with whatever it is that's happening in each and every moment. And then we can embody the process, like I was just saying, the evolution, the change that is life, as opposed to the destination-based approach. Yeah. And again, I love to-do list. I love completing. I love searching for that place where I could just kick back and relax. And this is coming, again, from very much my own personal experience of the suffering that comes with, can I just be over this? And again, I don't believe that that's the point here.
So would you say it's more acceptance that the healing journey is going to be bumpy and up and down, as opposed to thinking that you're going to have this like goal-oriented journey with your healing?
Well, because I think if we even just transpose, right, healing journey with life, life is up and down. There's stressful moments. Emotions are part of life. And again, I think sometimes when we're seeking with this idea that, in my opinion, it's unattainable, that right, we get to this place where emotions go away. We don't feel ups and downs. Stress doesn't happen. And again, I don't believe that we have so many factors that swirl around us, including other people and everything they bring to the table in our interactions, coloring our world around us. And again, I don't think it's a matter of right being done outside. I think it's a matter of learning how to weather the waves of life, the interactions with people that are part of the living experience.
Okay, so that's the quick fire questions over. And I'm going to go into the main part of the interview now. So I'm going to try not to completely gush over you and embarrass myself for this interview. But I come across your work maybe 4 or 5 years ago. It was actually a girl I was dating at the time introduced me to your work. And she was showing me a checklist of stuff. I was describing some stuff from a previous relationship that I was in. And she sent me one of your infographics. I feel like the colors have changed over time. They've evolved. But at the time, it was like this dark navy blue infographic with all of this stuff on it. And it was like word for word my experience that I hadn't been able to articulate. And I think it's so amazing what you've done in making all of these concepts so widely accessible through social media. And we talk a lot about accessibility, but what you've actually done is possibly the epitome of making something accessible, because these concepts have usually been gatekept to a therapist's office or to somewhere that you have to have some kind of financial privilege status to be able to even enter. Was that something that was always important to you, making this accessible? And why did you want to make these things accessible?
100%. I mean, I'm all smiles over here, even hearing you reflect back, seeing, I think, kind of how much accessibility is part of our mission. And so when I first created the account, if I'm being perfectly honest, it was more the holistic psychologist account on Instagram. That is, it was really an exercise in my own healing journey at that time. Very interestingly, coming to the awareness, like I was sharing a bit earlier, that I was someone who was always kind of filtering myself, always worrying about other people, always overstepping my boundaries, always showing up in what I call a version of performance. And as I came to live the accumulated, some 3 decades of the effects of that, I saw very clearly how I needed to make changes. I needed to create those boundaries or that space to begin to honor myself. And so one of the things that I knew was incredibly important, and actually, interestingly enough, was something that in the field of psychology, being a clinical psychologist or being trained to be one, I was strongly advised not to be that self, that person, definitely not in a room with the clients that I was working with. So not only in my personal life, right, did I water down myself pretty much across all of my different types of relationships, but I was actually directly told to do that in my clinical training. So of course, after seeing and exploring and learning about all of these, important concepts in healing and really shifting the way that I began to work, really honoring the holistic approach in myself and my journey. And I wanted to begin to teach myself how to share me. So the online account began as that almost more individual exercise of, can I have a space where I share as Nicole, as yes, I am a clinical psychologist and I'm now working holistically, and here's what I have to say. It was really important for me to make sure that even if you didn't have, the finances or the access to this information in the country that you're living in, that you could have these pieces of information. Because in my opinion, you could create incredible transformation if this information is accessible. So it is near and dear. It will always be part of the mission at the Holistic Psychologist, is to make sure that all of this information is accessible for people who are interested.
Yeah, I mean, the book to me is incredible, and it's just another way to scale the impact. And to me, it's just another level of accessibility, in my opinion.
Yeah, my hope for the book and the way I framed How to Do the Work, the way the new workbook, How to Meet Yourself, is I really invested so much effort, time, and energy into making it as comprehensive as possible, with that hope that you purchase this book and it really does become your roadmap. I had this idea before the How to Do the Workbook published, and all I imagined, and my heart would have exploded, seeing people, because I love to live with books. I love to revisit them. I love to dog ear pages, highlight it, right? I love to like really live in my books. And the ones that I really resonate with, are near and dear to my heart. And my hope was that, for at least one human, that how to do the work would be that. So anytime I see people, putting up their book with all the dog-eared pages or saying, this is my third time reading it, that's everything for me. Because again, my hope was you now have this comprehensive roadmap. And my hope is that what you get back is so much beyond the investment that you made. And again, even if you choose not to, I'm still going to be showing up on all the platforms every day, talking about these same concepts on my podcast and all of the different things.
Can you outline your philosophy on self-healing and what that looks like and what it was like to also introduce that model to the psychology space?
Yeah, absolutely. And funny enough, being we already kind of touched on the concept of misunderstanding. I think this is one of the concepts and one of the areas that is, kind of I'm taken to task on in terms of it being majorly misunderstood. And one of the major issues, I think, is how much we outsource our inner knowing and how much sometimes the professionals, right, collude with that outsourcing, with this idea that I do know better. There's a lot of life that happens outside of that 1 hour, right? So what we're talking about and what I've come to learn, what we're really talking about when we're talking about changing is changing the daily habits that are keeping us stuck in those patterns. So and I'm not diminishing the role that supportive professionals at that 1 hour a week safe container can play on our journey. For some of us, it's the only safety we have. It's the only place that we can begin to explore ourselves. However, what I saw week after week is change happens in all of those moments. In the moment where you're getting ready to fight with your partner, instead of screaming and yelling, right, you calm yourself down. Change happens when you learn to care for your body in a different way, or even the fact that you have a body and you're the person who's lived your life and you can learn how to be a conscious observer of why you're stuck. And then again, you're the person who's going to have to show up and learn how to make those new choices for yourself.
Have you found that it's hard? Because I love the concept of self-healing. I completely agree with you that it can't just happen in the 1 hour. And also you're just giving complete ownership and responsibility of your healing to this other person. You hand over the responsibility and so much power to someone else to be able to dictate your healing journey. I just find it really interesting that in this introduction of self-healing, it's almost like maybe some people are reluctant to, maybe it's uncomfortable to acknowledge that we have a part to play in that healing.
100%. What a human will experience as uncomfortable is anything, I'm going to get really big and global with this, that's unfamiliar, a new idea, right? A new possibility that I haven't yet lived for myself. Anything that is new, in whatever sense of the word it is, unfamiliar, I've not yet experienced this, I've not heard this, will signal threat to my body and to my nervous system, because we don't actually know what is the possible outcome of this new choice. And before I know it, I'm right back in that familiar. So I share this often because I think it can be a very shameful place when we set many different commitments and maybe we do have support and help around us, and yet we continue to find ourselves stuck in whatever way that it is we are stuck.
For, let's call it validation or something, or just to feel calmed down. We're looking for other people to make us feel good about ourselves. How do you avoid doing that? How do you know when you're looking for someone or you found a partner that feels that where it feels like a healthy bond or a healthy attachment to someone, as opposed to seeking to feel better from someone? And what advice do you have for people who are dating and healing?
So we observe ourselves, to answer the first part of the question. How do we know? And we want to practice observing ourselves objectively, non-judgmentally, I should say. So what observing ourselves simply means is, and how I came to this awareness myself, is I began to watch myself in relationships, observing myself consciously, that is, right? I became an observer in my mind, meaning I'm going about my day and I started to learn and see all of the moments that I am narrating, right, my day. If we're talking about habits, looking for someone else to make me feel better, how we can see that of ourselves is observing ourselves in relationship. Explore for yourself, get curious. The next time you're upset, watch what you do. Watch what you've thought, right? And then watch what you do. Do you grasp outside? Do you try and make someone, do something different?
I quite literally used to do that, where when I was hungover on a Sunday, I would grab my phone automatically to go onto dating apps.
Yes.
when I was feeling down. And then that was me observing. And it was when I was in this state of reading posts like yours and getting into psychology and going to therapy, when I was observing myself. It wasn't something that I just did unconsciously of like, oh, I fancy going on Hinge, I fancy going on Tinder. It then became this thing of like, I did it and I was like, oh my God, I'm feeling shit. And I'm literally reaching for the validation machine.
Yes.
Yeah,
to feel better.
Whenever you're in that, I don't do it anymore, but it was whenever you're in that low vibration anyway, you just end up attracting things. It's this, you end up doing things you don't want to do. So like I would be hungover. It's also this like internet joke that like you get most matches on dating apps on a Sunday because everyone's a bit hungover. So it's yeah, so it's when everyone's in this kind of like, you end up matching people and then on the Monday you'd get something in and be like, what was I thinking? I would never date this person in my life. What other advice do you have to someone who's dating, looking to form some kind of healthy attachment with someone, which I've seen you call conscious dating?
Yes. So
do you have any more tips?
Of course. I think the first thing that I want to offer everyone is first just a bit of normalization and acknowledgement that it is often in our dating and our romantic relationships where all of the old stuck habits, dysfunctional patterns, even often at times, really do live. So I first want to offer a bit of compassionate support for all of us who are struggling, because, so many of us, I do think, can see progress or whatever, if we want to go back to using that word, or see change, or, have new habits in certain areas. And then we begin to date, or we return home to the relationship that we're in, or we visit our family, our oldest relationships for most of us. And there are all those old habits again.
Yes. Going home to your parents for the holidays is like perfect example.
Oh my gosh. I mean, when you go home too with partners, anytime you visited maybe a partner's family, I've had this reflected back to me, bringing partners home, my partner in particular, Lolly, in the early parts of our relationship. While I did not like to hear her observation in the beginning, when she would very lovingly share it with me, that I had an agitation cycle around my family visits, and we were living in the neighboring state. So they were frequent, and she would notice that days leading up, I would become agitated and I would take it out. I would nitpick. We would get into arguments. At the time when I was at my parents' actual house, she would notice that I would be mean. I would be cold. I would snip to her. Oftentimes I'd be drinking too much to deal with the stress. And then there was like kind of the fallout of several days after. And gently, after, observing this pattern for some time, she began to bring that up to me. Nicole, do you notice this, this agitation? Does going to your family stress you out? Because this is what I'm noticing. And that's a very example of that. So again, normalizing, I think, the struggle, and also empowering, because, and to answer the question that anyone might have, if I am in a current relationship, if I'm not dating and I am in a relationship where I do come to the conscious awareness that there are some habits that aren't serving me and my partner and that I want to change. I get asked this a lot. When Lolly and I began dating, the concept that I refer to when we are living in those dysfunctional older relationship patterns, I call them trauma bond patterns. Lolly and I were very much cycling in our own trauma bond patterns. And I get asked quite often, can you heal? Can we change an active relationship? So the other side, the silver lining of this conversation, as much as we are all bringing our past relationship dynamics, our trauma bonds, typically until we become conscious, into our current relationships, as we practice becoming conscious, we do then have the gift of change. And we can modify, change dynamics in active relationships so that they are healthier, safer for everyone involved.
You said then about we all rely on each other in one way or another. And I think that's called interdependence, right? Like it's how we're meant to be in society. Yes. What I find really interesting is how we're becoming increasingly, it's kind of going the other way now, but everyone's becoming a bit more independent. I feel like through the pandemic, we kind of realized how important our connections with other people were. And then there's the opposite, which is codependence, which is another thing that gets spoken about on social media all the time. And I think there are so many misconceptions on codependence, but I've seen you speak about it on social media. Can you refresh us on what codependency is, what it looks like, and some kind of go-to signs that you might be codependent or in a codependent relationship?
Absolutely. I'm going to start though with interdependence, and then kind of we'll backtrack to that.
Okay, go for it.
What interdependence is, because there's an intentional reason for all of it. What interdependence is the ability to be separate me's, if you will. I'm uniquely me, and Floss, you're uniquely you, and we can join together as a we, where I'm able to maintain my natural gifts, talents, what makes me me. I don't have to water those down. I don't have to adapt or modify myself. And you have the gift of being the beautiful puzzle piece that probably has, different natural gifts, talents, things that come easy. And together we can form a really efficient, coherent, cooperative, harmonious system. So that's what interdependence is. And I'm being very intentional here because sometimes I think, so let's go to codependency first. Codependency is how I and many of us grew up, where there was no separation. There was no boundaries like we talked about earlier. A lot of times it's this version of group think. We all think the same things. I don't even trust self. What's self? I'm always vetting my choices through someone else. Over time, what we do and what we will do, because those connections to those relationships are so very important, is we're going to modify ourselves. We might become, again, a boundaryless person that's always looking to please, to be there. People pleaser is the best kind of way to think about the kind of prototypical codependent. Now, going back to the other side of the spectrum, and I just want to clarify too something that I think sometimes gets a bit confused. Being separate together means being separate, having that separate difference, right? Having space for me to explore, express whatever it is that makes me uniquely me or uniquely different. A lot of times it seems to me that we're being urged, or environments are created where this idea of groupthink is being packaged as caring for the community or caring for the family. However, what we are required to do to be part of the unit, a lot of us, is to lose what makes me me, or to lose or sacrifice some version of myself.
For the collective. So you need to sacrifice something for the collective. Sacrifice
a part of who I am, right? We're not talking about negotiating. I'm going to sacrifice some time here to give it to you, or I'm going to sacrifice some, emotional bandwidth because you're going through something and I have the resources. So I'm going to hold space and listen to you. We're not
just being a kind person and giving up some of your time.
That's negotiation in a relate. That's why we are. That's why we need others, because we want to relate and have that back and forth.
So codependence is sacrificing parts of yourself, doing things you maybe don't want to do for the approval, validation, or whatever it is, simply just keeping the peace sometimes in a relationship, because it's maybe what you learned in childhood about sacrificing a part of yourself to keep the peace.
When you feel you have no choice.
Again, back to your definition of self-healing. I feel like there is so much self-healing in that. You cannot point to other people not to invite you out to places. They should know you're busy. You should be the person to say, I'm busy and I'm unavailable to see you tonight. And I think I call them resentment ships, where it's almost these friendships or relationships that you have with people where you're overcommitting, overdoing all of this stuff when the person didn't even ask you to do this. And I think I've read somewhere that it's called something like the drama triangle. I don't know if you subscribe to that, or if you think that it's a framework that I've read about before, where it's essentially some kind of addiction to the process of overcommitting, resenting the person. Then you get to be the victim and complain that you're busy and being overworked and all of this stuff all the time. And then you just go back to doing all the things again. And it's some kind, when actually you could just say no and give people a chance to respect or disrespect you. In which case, the worst thing that happens is the person reveals himself to not be a very safe person in your life, and you can act accordingly after that.
Right. Well, to just kind of, I think, more verbalize the complicated nature, because yes, it is that simple, though, when we pull back that layer, right? Why can't we say no? What might it mean to be a person, right? There's a reason why saying no is so hard. What would it mean about me? What will I fear this person will think about me if I say no? There's a reason why that no has become so difficult for so many of us. And for some of us, the answer might be, well, then I'm not of service to them anymore. They might not need me. They might not like me. They might not love me. They might not, bottom line, want to be in a relationship with me. So while it can sound like it's just a no, if it's a no, say no, it is really so much more than a no. And for some of us, we've worn identities of being the person who never says no, the helper, the always on the go, the yes man, as I call.
There's pride in that I feel often comes into, particularly with women, there's pride in being this selfless person. Like that label is used so much with women, as though it's to be selfless is the best thing that you could be.
That always pouring right into relationships is how we're meant to be. And again, I think a lot of it could be gendered, it could be cultural. There's just so many different messages that so many of us have gotten. And then that is how we continue to operate.
You've spoke about good girl conditioning on your Instagram recently in a couple of posts. I loved them. Can you talk a bit more about that? Just on the subject of the being selfless and the giving and the people pleasing. I think it's so great.
Yeah. So good girl conditioning, and, we can have good person if we don't want to make a gender about it. But again, it's this idea, oftentimes selflessness. It's what we imagine good, right? And again, I can maybe be a little controversial here and say, good is a subjective word. If I say what's good to you, you might list things that I might think some are good and I might think some aren't good, right?
Yeah.
So all of these words, right, like good, bad are I think very, very subjective, but very entrenched. It might fall along gender lines, is this idea of, once we have this idea of what it is to be good, a lot of time it is to be selfless, not to cause issue, not to bring up conflict, to be quiet, to be easygoing. I mean, this is, I think, a lot of probably what comes to mind when we think of prototypical good. And then again, it's this idea that is how I have to show up in every sort of circumstance. And then if we're really black and white about it, then any other way of being is bad, right? I would assume. And then we begin to really monitor ourselves, police ourselves, censor ourselves, and we don't allow our authentic self-expression, for some of us based in this subjective morality that we might not even agree with into adulthood if we were to really, really question ourselves. And I talk about good girl a lot because I think a lot of us, for different reasons, really can identify, and it looks often like that critical voice in our head.
Did you have a moment in your life when you decided to stop being this good girl, or stop performing? You've said that you realized a lot of it you were doing before was just performing this role that you'd learned in childhood. Did you have a moment where you just had enough and decided to embark on this journey?
I think for me, it was a accumulation of a lifetime of moments. And I wouldn't even have had, almost when I'm hearing you ask that question, I'm picturing like sticking a flag in. I'm done now.
Yes.
And I'm done with this specific thing, screw everyone. I'm just me.
It never works like that, really.
It never, I wouldn't have even been able to be that emphatic that that's what it was. Cause again, it was very much like this unfolding, peeling of an onion. And it began though with feeling so disempowered, so stuck, so just depleted of energy, so disconnected from myself, my emotions, my relationships. And again, it wasn't a moment. It was just an accumulation of having really felt all of those ways for a lifetime, that for me, when I was entering into my 30s, got to the point of feeling intolerable. And again, I probably wouldn't have been like, I've been living the life for everyone else and screw it. I probably wouldn't have had that exact language then, though. What I did know is something had to change. And the major something, I think one of the major somethings that I changed first was my relationship with my family, and learning how to begin to utilize different types of boundaries, even taking complete space from them for probably a period about 18 months to give myself the opportunity to have a bit more space to reconnect, to begin to explore where it was. So while there wasn't, again, a pivotal moment where I stuck my flag in, I think a pivotal moment ended up being when I did make that choice I'm still very much on it, because I believe, again, life is a process of self-discovery.
It was like that for me as well. It was definitely a succession of moments. I think probably a really good breakup that I had. It wasn't a good breakup, but it was very good for me, for my life, for myself, and for everything that I wanted to make room for in my life. For me, it was definitely a breakup, but it came before the breakup. It was the breakup was almost like this decision I'd made in the wake of all of these realizations. Suddenly you just become so fed up with the way that things are, and you realize the only fucking common denominator in every situation is yourself. And then you realize that you need to do something to change.
Yes. Yeah. Very similarly, I too left I think very much, I loved the way you even kind of conceptualize it. It wasn't the breakup. It was like a byproduct of left a marriage.
Yeah, collateral damage.
Left a marriage several years ago now, almost probably a decade ago, 10 years ago, for same thing, realization. The reason why I think I reference the decision I made with my family, now the decision I made with my ex-wife, was because I have literally a handful. There was one other decision I could reference when I decided to stop playing softball in college.
Okay.
Those were all one of the very few limit. I mean, there's 3, that's it, in a lifetime of decisions I've made. And I'm now 40 years old up more recently, I've been making many more choices for myself, but pivotally on my journey, that was a handful of choices in, say, my 30 then years that I made for me, knowing it might cause upset in someone else. And there was few others, if any.
The thing that I've always thought about when it comes to these relationships and whether or not to leave them or whether or not to leave this job is that I've always reminded myself there is a cost either way. So there is a cost to stay and there is a cost to leaving. You can either, the cost of staying in an unhappy relationship or a job that doesn't fulfill you is immense. You just maybe can't see it. It will have an impact on the body. It has an impact on your mental health. It impacts your relationships with other people, your general well-being. So I feel like there's a cost either way. There's a cost for staying. And then there's a cost for leaving also. But there's a cost either way. You pay something either way. Yeah. We're going to move into the listener questions in just a second from my audience. But just before we do that, do you have a way of discerning what's anxiety and what's intuition? I know that's like the $1 million question that everyone wants to know the answer to.
That is the journey. I think the simplest way I can answer this is I believe our intuition speaks in different ways, because again, I think a lot of us confuse intuition with the voice in our mind.
Okay. Yeah.
While for some of us, it can speak in words and in phrases. I think a lot of times it's much more nonverbal. It speaks in sensations. I think a lot of times we can feel those shifts and changes, constrictions, lightness being on the other end of that I'm grabbing my chest, in our heart space. Really attuning to our body, I think, is the shift I want to make. Of course, anxiety lives in our body. Anxiety usually feels like an elevated heart rate. When we're tuned into our body in a safe way and we're tuned into our intuition, our heart rate usually isn't elevated. It's probably very calm, even, maybe even from deep in our belly. Our body has to feel safe. It has to be open for us to feel our heart. Whenever our heart is racing, whenever our blood is pumping, usually we're in a sort of anxious state. Whenever our thoughts are racing, whenever they're very repetitive, again, that is, so I think I'm more answering what it is not. That is anxiety. Yes. That is not intuition. And again, intuition again is different for each of us. That's why I really urge all of us to get connected with ourselves, with our body, with our heart, and how that speaks.
Thank you so much. We're now going to move into listener questions. Can you give me a hand answering them?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, the first question here. Where should I start on inner child healing work?
Oh, very, very good question. Inner child is very much like the concepts we're talking about. A conditioned, often, space in our mind that has many of the deep-rooted beliefs that were created based on our very earliest lived experiences. So inner child, often, and beautifully, this applies to the entire conversation, where we typically meet our inner child is when we're having a really, really big emotional reaction. Chances are disproportionate, one might say. Chances are that all that means is we're not wrong. Something is very real happening inside of us. The question is, though, is it grounded in the reality of the moment now, or is it colored by the reality of my past moments? So inner child work really can begin by becoming conscious of those moments in our life. And you've given the beautiful example earlier in our talk, right? Having that point of pause, of reflection. Why is it I'm feeling compelled to do what I'm doing? Why am I screaming and yelling? What is so big for me right now? What was the meaning I assigned? And that can give us clarity. Again, we can give ourselves the gift of relieving the shame that we feel when we see ourselves screaming and yelling, maybe hurting our loved ones, and understand that, again, as part of our older wounding, over time giving us the tools to make new choices. So consciousness for inner child. Look for big moments of reactivity, and for those older, more immature seeming coping mechanisms. Those are usually an indicator that something deeper is happening.
Something I'm thinking about now is how all of these reasons that you're explaining about how sometimes we can lash out at our loved ones and hurt people. In the extreme case, though, of emotional abuse or when people are hurting other people, I've been in situations where I've used their trauma to justify why they're doing what they're doing. And I've always struggled with, I'm better at it now, but previously I feel like I've struggled with learning when to... the difference between explaining something and excusing it. Yes. Just because we can explain something and the reasons why this person is doing X, Y, and Z doesn't mean we excuse it.
Yes, that's a beautiful and important distinction to make. And very similarly, when we were talking a bit about compassion, I would
Yes.
compassion away my very real, violations. And relationship comes to mind that was, I had a partner who, because of her own, and I was very well aware of her past history, was, very verbally and emotionally abusive to me at times. And I pulled so far back. I said, okay, well, she doesn't really mean it. I know she's a good person in her heart. She's really wounded. It's not really about me. And in reality, I can have that whole conversation with myself and still, and this is why the relationship eventually did come after many stops and starts when I would distance myself and then I would come back. And when I did finally put up that hard boundary, no, you are wounded. I can love you better from this distance, safe space over here when I'm not on the victim end of that abuse anymore. But that distinction is really challenging.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. Here's the next question. Is there a link between my dad abandoning me and my hypersexuality and my need of constant male validation, or is there something else?
That's a really, it sounds like whoever asked this question is talking about a more physical abandonment, and that happens to a lot of us. Parents actually leave. Some of us weren't even raised by, biological parents, maybe in foster care with aunts or uncles or whomever, right? Physical abandonment, the person is no longer physically available to us. And there's also emotional abandonment, which is what I experienced, having a mom that was always present. She was, the stay-at-home mom. That was the role she played in her relationship with my dad, but emotionally, she was never present. So while I can't, kind of connect knowing all of the details of this listener, this question, the rest of their life, though, it is something to explore. Any of us who are left in whatever way might feel deeply unworthy and then see these compensatory ways that we try to get that external validation from others. Again, us just trying to heal that older wound from our childhood.
Is there any way to kind of shift that narrative that the child has about why their parent left? Or is it inevitable that a wound will always be there because something's left?
Communication. I think children they're not giving us enough credit. They're so attuned, aware creatures. And a lot of us, for different reasons, probably our own discomfort too, in talking about this very hard thing, children aren't told things that they are sensing really often. Right. And so that I'm applying to here, right? The more we can fill in the story and directly share, and again, with whatever is developmentally appropriate, because then there's an extreme side of this too, where children are gifted with information that's too developmentally immature. This is called parentification, right? Where I'm given too much information. So of course it's the parental discretion to figure out what and how it can be communicated in a developmentally appropriate way. But your child is going to fill in a narrative themselves anyway.
Okay, thank you so much. We have time for one more question. So that's, how can you navigate it when you and your friend are at very different stages of your healing journey and you want to remain friends?
Really, really great question. Get it really often. We can apply friend, partner, whatever, family member. Honoring, I think, just where each is. It's really natural to want to bring friends, loved ones along, to want to change, especially if the way they're interacting and where their stage is, causing us concern or issue or stress in our relationship, though ultimately just honoring open communication, honoring that the relationship itself will now have a new set of growing pains, if one person begins to show up differently, the dynamic itself changes. So sensitivity as well to the difficulties that you might be seeing in a friend who is maybe on a different stage of healing.
Okay, amazing answer. Thank you so much for your time. I have so much to think about after this episode. Thank you so much. Been an excellent guest.
Thank you, Floss, so much for having me. Thank you all for listening. This has really been a great conversation.
Oh my God, another amazing conversation, and someone I want you to, again, follow on Instagram, all social media platforms instantly. Nicole's Instagram is @theholistic psychologist. Again, you probably know who she is. You've probably seen her work before. You should absolutely check out her Instagram if you want this kind of content and this educational psychology, therapeutic advice daily. She makes amazing Instagram reels. She makes amazing infographics breaking down all of these topics. She's helped so many people in their relationships, with their own healing journey, with their own families. She is incredible, and she's given me so much to think about after this episode.